Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Let me give you a scenario. You, the doctor, have a schedule that's so busy that you are booked out 2 to 3 weeks in advance. As a matter of fact, if a patient were to call today for an appointment, your first available would be 2 Wednesdays from now at 10:40 a.m., 19 days to be exact. All of this has you feeling very content. You feel secure knowing that you have plenty of future production. And after all, the further out the doctor's schedule is booked, the better, right? Well, that really depends on who you ask. If you were to ask me, I'm going to say, not really. And I'll take it a step further. Regardless of how productive you are, you should always be able to see a productive procedure on your schedule within 1 to 3 days. Now, if you're not that busy, this statement may not seem like all that much of a challenge. But if you are busy and booked out a week, 10 days, or 2 weeks plus in advance, you may be wondering how in the world you're supposed to see somebody that quickly, or if it's even really that important. Well, that's what I want to cover in this week's episode. Specifically, how far is too far when it comes to being booked on the doctor's schedule? And more importantly, in my mind, why you may be booked out too far, as well as some ideas about what to do about it. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And before I get into the, why your schedule may be booked out too far, I want to cover 3 simple yet very important points. First point is being busy and productive are not the same thing. I've seen lots of busy schedules that are not productive, and I've seen productive schedules that are not all that busy. Ideally, you want both of those things to be true. You're busy and productive. Second thing is, I'm mainly focusing on the doctor's schedule in this episode. I'm not talking about the hygiene schedule. In my mind, that's a whole other thing. I might get into it briefly here or there, especially when we're talking about new patients on the hygiene schedule. But I believe it deserves its own episode, and you'll probably see one in the weeks to come. Last point is, I'm going to be going over a few ideas here. You're operating however you're operating. You have to take, just like with anything that you study or learn, you have to do what is real to you. I'm a big, firm believer in everybody is responsible for their own condition. So, take whatever advice I give you. If you want to use it, but realize you're using it on your own volition. Don't do this just because you learned it on a podcast, okay? So with those 3 things out of the way, I think the best place to start is, why is it important to be able to have availability on your schedule? Well, the first reason would be, if you don't have availability, you really have no room for growth. You're going to stay somewhat static. And I've seen some doctors get into this frame of mind where, they need to become more productive, but they're very, very busy. They don't quite know what to do, so they're going to learn larger procedures with the idea that you're doing higher ticket items on your schedule, which that could work to a degree. It's really not sustainable long term. It's sort of like, maybe you're maxed out at 80,000. Then you can do more involved procedures. Now you're maxed out at 100,000. It doesn't offer the ability for continuous growth, which if you have your schedule freed up and you're doing this the right way, you will have the ability to grow continuously. Second thing has to do with quick service. It's sort of become a bit of a oversaid, but these days people expect to get things instantly between Amazon and Uber Eats and everything else. I don't necessarily think just because Amazon delivers right away that a dental patient expects to have something done right away. They're not the same thing. But that being said, I think the ability to deliver quickly is important. The quicker you deliver, the better. That's always been my viewpoint. If a client is expecting X and they're willing to wait 3 weeks and I can get it to them in a week, that's even better. It sets a nice precedent. It's fast service. It's always a good thing. And the last thing is, it actually can become counterproductive if you make people wait. On the one hand, you may have patients that you're talking to about, a certain type of treatment. Let's say they need 4 or 5 crowns done, and they agree to do it. Maybe you don't have great financial arrangements in your practice. Patients don't put any money down. They don't prepay, nothing, but they just go on your schedule, which that still happens from time to time. So they go on your schedule 2 weeks from now because that's your earliest available opening. Well, that gives them 2 weeks to think about it for a while. And for life to happen to them. Well, the next week something happened and now they want to put their funds in another direction and they change their mind and call and cancel on your schedule. It definitely, the longer you make somebody wait, the more prone you are to having cancellations and potentially no-shows. The other thing is if you're taking prepayments. So let's say patient came in, they needed 4 crowns, and you had the patient pay in advance for this. So, maybe I got a prepayment discount. Let's say your crowns are $1,200, and you gave me it was $4,800, and you gave me a 5% prepayment discount, so I saved a couple dollars. And you can't get me on the schedule for a week and a half to 2 weeks. Well, I go home, I talk to my spouse about it. That was a lot of money. She didn't want me to pay that much, and then something else happens in my life. And then a week later, I'm calling for a refund. Okay. It also sets a bad precedent from a business perspective in my mind, in that if I'm asking for somebody to pay right now, okay, you can prepay, but that means you pay now, today. And it's a little anticlimactic when I say, okay, good, I'll see you in 2 weeks. I demanded payment immediately. You would expect service to be close to immediate in that case. If you pay today and I'll see you tomorrow, that's better. Or I'll see you a day after tomorrow. That's a heck of a lot better. The other problem is if you have a situation where it's taking a while for patients to get on your schedule, like you're booked out too far, it covers up other problems in the practice. You may have problems with your case presentation and acceptance process in your practice. You potentially may need an associate and you don't realize it because things are going out too far. It also, if you're that tightly booked, you're going to have a situation where you're going to have trouble finding time to actually present treatment effectively. And the last thing is, if you're booked out 2-3 weeks in advance and then all of a sudden the schedule empties out, things go wrong, it takes a little bit longer to recover. I could spend a while explaining why that is, but it's sort of like, I've just seen it. You're scheduled 3 weeks out and then all of a sudden the schedule empties out, and then it sort of throws people into a little bit of disarray at that point because they're used to operating a certain way. So if you are booked out too far, what might be the problem? Like, why would I find this a problem? And what would I normally be looking at if I'm talking to an MGE client and I see they're booked out 10 days, 2 weeks in advance? Well, I'll tell you where I'd start. First thing I'm going to look at is their schedule pattern. Is there any rhyme or reason to their schedule, or do they just fill openings on the schedule? If are some days only $1,000 in production, some days $400 in production, and some days $8,000 in production, because there's no pattern to how things are scheduled. That will create a problem, because the second you establish a pattern, you start to see how you'll have consistency of production, and you'll start to see when you have problems. For instance, what's commonly been the acceptable, and I see why, or the preferred way of scheduling in a practice usually is to do your larger procedures in the morning. What we might call primary procedures, your crowns, your veneers, your implants, etc. Now, why is this? Because, there's a lot of good reasons for it. You've made your production quota by lunch. You don't have to worry. It's not 3:00 and you're wondering where your production's going to come from. It also, usually those procedures, especially surgical type procedures, are a little bit more involved. Things tend to get busier in the afternoon. Obviously, I wouldn't say that to patients. I've heard people use that as a patient scheduling technique. The doctor wants to see you for this procedure in the morning because that's when they're freshest. I probably wouldn't say that, because inevitably one of those patients is going to end up seeing you in the evening and wondering if the doctor's fresh enough to perform the procedure. But I just think it's better. You get that out of the way. Now you can just coast through the rest of the day and enjoy yourself. Well, if you don't have a structure that way and people are just filling any opening on the schedule, then you have no idea where you're at. You might walk in and you're back to back to back working out of 3 operatories and you're producing nothing. So the first thing I'm going to look for is pattern. Next thing I'm going to look for is, are they double booking with one assistant, which is a bit of an oxymoron. You can't double book with one dental assistant. That is physically impossible. Proper double booking would be accomplished with an assistant in each chair running each chair. And, we cover this in our scheduling for production seminar. It's one of our free introductory events we do online. We also cover this in our on our online platform, DDS Success. I'll put links to these on the episode webpage, where we have our Art of Scheduling Productively course, where we go over the scheduling system. I also talked about this a bit back in episodes 49 and 50 a year or so ago. But if you were to take 5 or 6 hours of procedures and book them linearly, okay, that's 5 or 6 hours. If you properly double book them where you have a good division of what's doctor time and assistant time, you can probably take those 5 hours of procedures and get them done in 3 or 3.5. So you create a lot of time for yourself. Whereas if you're not doing that, you will look very busy. So I'm looking at those two things first normally. Do they have a pattern? Are they double booking properly? Now, let's say they do. They do have a pattern. They are double booking properly. The next thing I'm going to look at on a doctor's schedule, if they're booked out too far, is what type of procedures they're doing and what does their sales process look like. And to give you the flavor of what I'm referring to here, generally speaking, offices that tend to get better acceptance of full treatment plans are obviously going to be more productive. That's sort of a no-brainer. but their schedules are going to be more efficient. So if I come into your practice and I need 6 crowns and you can close me, for lack of a better word, on doing those 6 crowns, and I'm going to do them this year, I'm going to do them now, well, then I'm only seeing you once for 6 crowns. You've already numbed me up. You've only numbed me up once. I'm not coming for 2 this year, 2 next year, and 2 the year after, which is 3 separate appointments where I'm in and out of a chair. I have to be, brought in, seated, numbed up, discharged, etc. Instead, you're bringing me in once to do all 6. That's more efficient than doing 2 at a time, which again, that doesn't defy logic. I think most people can think with that. So there's the acceptance factor, how good your acceptance is, which will have a lot to do with your schedule efficiency. Now, there's a couple ways this can manifest. I've seen it where some people are just a bit backed off, for lack of a better word, on presenting a full treatment. Let's say it's a new patient and they need a lot of treatment. You've just met them and you figure you don't want to just come in and drop a bomb on them that they need $10,000, $12,000 worth of treatment. So you start with the perio, right? You're going to tell them they need perio. Well, you had to take the time to let them know they needed to do your soft tissue management program for whatever, $900 or $1,200. And they agree to that. And then during that, you have to come into the room again, and maybe they need, let's say, a few crowns and an implant. You go, okay, I don't want it. You're going to start with what the active disease is, right? So you're going to start with the teeth that need the crowns, but you'll go over those, and they agree to do 1 or 2 of those. Then you tell them while you're doing the crowns, when they're there to see you, that they really should get an implant too. You've taken a sales process which could have been 20 minutes for everything or 30 minutes for everything, and you stretched it out to over an hour, and you've created more encounters between you and the patient, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but it's not very efficient, and it makes you look busier than you actually are, okay, by doing it that way. So it can manifest like that, where maybe you're just a little backed off and you feel uncomfortable telling somebody what they need, which, I've talked about this in prior episodes. You should just tell people what they need. It's the better way to go. That's what I would want if I went to see a doctor. I'm sure that's what you would want. Just tell people what they need. And you know what? Truthfully, some people are going to be upset with you for telling them what they need. And you could say it in the nicest way. And some people are going to be upset with you for just about anything. I wouldn't predicate my whole how I operated on whether people are going to be upset with me or not. If they need X, Y, and Z, I'm going to tell them they need X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to be a jerk about it. I'm going to tell them they need it, though, and be willing to answer their questions because I really would like them to get it. And some people might be offended that I want them to get it, and fine, maybe they just aren't a good fit for my practice at that point, okay? But if your sales process is a problem, if you're operating off of not giving the patient the full treatment plan when they come in to see you for the first time, or you're doing the let's just do what insurance covers, operation where we're doing 2 crowns this year, 2 crowns the year after, 2 crowns after that, you are going to see that your schedule is not very efficient. And you've probably heard this concept out there for a while. You should be doing quadrant dentistry. Where you're getting a lot done in one appointment, right? Well, the only problem with that statement, I agree with that statement. I mean, heck, I think you could do multiple quadrant dentistry. But the only disagreement or the only problem with that statement, rather, is no one tells you how to sell quadrant dentistry. It's like, yeah, you should do it. We think that's a good idea, but then you got to get somebody to actually accept it. So, again, we do a lot of training in that regard. I don't want to get into too many shameless plugs here, but if you want to learn how to increase your treatment acceptance, we have stuff on that on our DDS Success platform. Again, the link will be on the episode webpage, or you can check out the MGE Communications and Sales Seminars. All right. So those are the 3 main reasons that I'll see. And usually between one of those 3, schedule structure, not double booked properly, or their sales process is not proper, usually I'm able to debug and free up the doctor's schedule a bit. Now, in some cases, those aren't problems. They are double booking properly. They've got great scheduling policy, and their sales aren't all that bad, especially with a more experienced MGE client. Well, what does that mean then? Most likely it means that they're validly maxed out and they need an associate, which I know, look, when you get to that point, that's a big decision to make for your practice. You're bringing in a doctor. This isn't like bringing in a part-time floater assistant, right? This is a large commitment. How do you pay them? Is it time to, do it? Should we wait a little bit? Well, a couple things there, right? Number one, as far as how to pay them and all those types of things, we can help you with that. But ultimately, you don't have to bring in a full-time associate. You can always start with somebody 1 or 2 days a week. Okay. It doesn't have to be somebody full time. You may not go from where you are now to needing a full time associate immediately. As a matter of fact, when that normally happens, that means that the main owner, doctor, provider is pretty overwhelmed and stressed out with the amount of work on their schedule. You might start with an associate 1 or 2 days a week, or a day and a half, and then it moves up eventually. Let's say you're working 4 days a week to where you have somebody 4 days a week, and now you've got a full-time associate for all intents and purposes. And then maybe you're looking at adding another one. Couple things I would look at before I made that decision, and this is again what I would do with a client before I said, yes, you need to go get an associate. First thing I'm going to look at is PPO involvement in the practice. If the practice is primarily PPO, it's 80% PPO, reduced fee plans where they're getting $800 or $900 a crown instead of the $1,200 or $1,300 that they would normally charge full fee. Before I go grabbing an associate or having them grab one, I'm probably going to have them start reducing their PPO involvement because, again, if you do it right, you're not going to lose all that many patients. Talked about that a lot. But you are going to lose some, and it may reduce the volume a little bit, and it's going to require some work because it's going to require your team and the staff to start, because again, we've talked about this at length in prior episodes, how where, a dental practice tends to have a high churn rate, meaning, it's used in the online industry a lot as far as, subscribers that you're losing, like Netflix would lose that. If they're losing a certain amount of subscribers, that's their quote unquote churn rate, right? Well, dental practices have an extraordinarily high churn rate. Usually after 5-10 years, they're only seeing 30% of the patients on a routine basis that they had gotten over the last 5 or 10 years, which you think about it, that's pretty terrible. 3 out of 10 people still there. So if you're going to look at dropping PPOs, it isn't just a matter of let me market for a bunch more new patients. It's also a matter of let me reactivate the patients I still have in my base. So there's a bit of work there. So before we add that associate, we're going to cycle out of these PPOs and stay or get busier. You will see, if you do this correctly, you'll see a 0 drop in profit. In most cases, you'll see an increase in profit immediately. But we're going to go that route before we start adding another provider because another provider can get expensive, okay? The other thing I would look at too is if we're going to add an associate is what is our new patient flow like? Because again, depending on how the practice was seeing new patients, and there's really no right or wrong way to do it. Some offices have the new patient, I'm talking about new patient initials. Obviously, the doctor's always doing the initial exam, but some of those get scheduled directly on the doctor's schedule. Others get scheduled on the hygiene schedule with the doctor coming in to do the exam. There's no right or wrong way. That is a personal preference point. Okay. So I'm not going to give you a right or wrong, but there's pros and cons to everything. But if, let's say, you've been limited because your volume is so intense, let's say hygiene slammed and your schedule has been slammed, well, there's a good chance that if I call as a new patient, it takes me 1 to 2 weeks to get in. Well, you are artificially, in that case, suppressing your potential new patients. And you might go, Jeff, what are you talking about? We don't ever suppress our new patients. And I would respond by saying, yes, you absolutely are. If I call your practice, you have to look at the mindset. And sometimes this is one of the key things you have to be able to do when you're marketing. Okay. Marketing requires that you're able to assume the attitude of the person you are marketing to. Okay. You don't want to think like yourself when you're marketing. You want to think like who's receiving your promotion. So if I am, you're doing Google pay-per-click, let's say, and I click your ad, dentist near me, I look and there you are and I click your ad and I call your practice and you can't see me for 2 weeks. I want you to examine what kind of a relationship do we have at this point? Let's assume your receptionist is a great person and they're doing a good job when they answered the phone, but they can't get me in sooner than 2 weeks. And this is not because I can't come in sooner than 2 weeks. This is because you have zero availability for 2 weeks. Well, our relationship is, no stronger than a thread. All I know about you is I found you when I, typed in dentist near me. You can't see me for 2 weeks. I know for a fact there were pages and pages of other dentists near me that came after you. I just happened to click your ad first. Something about your ad grabbed me. Maybe the point it was on the page or something it said. So I clicked it. But we have no relationship. So if you can't see me for 2 weeks, there's a good chance I'm going to click the next one, hang up, and either A, set an appointment and just not show up for it or cancel it later, or B, I'm not going to make one and call the next person on the page. So you may think, okay, well, we're not suppressing our new patients, but you absolutely are when you have no availability. The only way you're going to make me be able to get through that is if we have some form of a relationship. You see my wife as a patient and my kids already, so therefore I'm going to be going to you. Or my friend highly recommended your practice, which that's great. But even then, you want to be able to see me sooner. So you have to be able to see new patients within usually 24 to 48 hours. It's another thing to think with. Again, I've talked about that in, a lot, but that's something you want to be able to do. You always have to see a new patient within 24 to 48 hours and get them in quickly. So the reason I'm bringing this up is, let's say you've been slammed and hygiene's been slammed and your new patient numbers aren't that great because you haven't been able to fit people in. Well, starting off by dropping those PPOs and seeing if your new your patient roster starts to fill up a bit more would be helpful, because if you're going to bring on an associate doctor, okay, there's two areas you're going to want to look at. Number one is, do you have the new patient volume to support that associate? And do you have the hygiene volume to support that associate? So I'll give you a couple basic numbers. For a full-time associate, I would want, or for a full-time doctor provider, I'm going to want to see 20 to 30 new patients a month. My bare minimum is 20. So a solo practitioner, 20 to 30 new patients a month. Okay. If you're getting 40 to 50 to 60, you could probably support 2 doctors at that point. If you're staying at 20, that's a problem. So if you're looking at adding an associate, you want to make sure either you're at the cusp of starting a really nice marketing campaign that you know is going to work, or you have a lot of new patients or potential for new patients so that you know that you could actually support an associate. Now, how could you tell that if you haven't been seeing a lot? You probably have some form of call recording software, or, that goes through some cloud-based site that you're using. You might want to start listening to some of your new patient calls. And you might find what I just described to you. A person calls in, I'd like to come to your practice, and they can't be seen for 2 weeks. And then you go, okay, well, I'm blowing new patients off. I might be able to fill up my new patient roster here a little bit, right? Or you need to get going on some marketing. The second thing is hygiene. If, and this is just, look, this isn't, nuclear physics. This isn't science. It's just sort of best practices. What we've seen tends to work out the best. If you want to support a doctor provider in a practice, you want to have, for every doctor day, you want to have 1 to 1.5 hygiene days. So if I have a 4-day-a-week practice and I have a full-time doctor, let's say that's you as the doctor owner, I'm going to want 4 to 6 days of hygiene. I'm going to want a full-time hygienist or 1.5 hygienists to be able to support that full-time doctor. When you start to go above 1.5 to 1 with the doctor, meaning I've got 2 full-time hygienists and 1 doctor, it actually can become counterproductive for the doctor, because they're having to spend more time, doing hygiene exams and new patient exams than they are actually doing dentistry. So 1 to 1.5 seems to be sort of the magic number per doctor provider. Now, how do some people get around that? I've seen practices with 3 doctors and 1 hygienist, but they also get, 120 new patients. But again, that may seem cool and it may seem very productive, but what that also tells you, if the hygiene schedule is not growing, is they're basically operating as if they're a specialist. They're seeing all these new patients. They're not retaining them at all. They're going out the back door because they're not coming back on the hygiene schedule, which is silly, because you spent all this money to get them as a new patient. You may as well keep them and keep them with the practice. So if you're looking at in that associate, number one, I would take a look at your PPO involvement. This is, again, what I would do with you if you were a client. And then let's say we filter out the PPOs and you're still at the point where, I need an associate. Then I'm going to look at what's our new patient flow look like and what does our hygiene flow look like. And I'm going to make sure that those are growing at the same time as I'm bringing that associate. In some cases, I've actually even brought the associate in who's doing hygiene part-time. They're 2 days a week on hygiene, 2 days a week being a doctor, just to make up for that doctor to hygienist ratio. So sort of the upshot of all this is you don't want to rest your security. I feel secure because your schedule is busy 2 weeks from now. Because here's the truth. Those patients could not show up. It really is just a name in a book, right? If you have a healthy practice where you're getting tons of new patients, your hygiene is growing, your sales process is decent, you're always going to be busy. But if you're too busy, check against these things that we discussed here in this episode and see if any of those fit what's happening in your practice. And if you have any questions, you can always give us a call here at MGE. I'll give you our contact information here in a second, and we're more than willing to help. Anyway, hope this helps. If you have any questions about what I covered in this episode, you can email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. I'll put it on the episode webpage. I also put links on the episode webpage to the stuff I brought up, that scheduling seminar. It's free, by the way. Our scheduling course on our online platform, DDS Success, the Art of Scheduling. I'll put a link to that, as well as some of the sales training on there as well. and the MGE Communication and Sales Seminar. And if you have any questions, you want to reach us here at MGE, you can call us at 800-640-1140 or find us online at mgeonline.com. Folks, have a great week. This is technically the second episode of 2024. So let's have a great year. I think I said that last week too for the first one. And I'll see you at the next episode.